don't think there's anything I enjoy more than sitting on the porch and watching the clouds go by when the sun is setting and seeing those silver line clouds. This resource photo is one that I took when we were on vacation in Hartselle, Colorado. Such a beautiful view. We're going to start our painting by drawing the horizon line, making sure you're drawing it lightly, but understanding that rule of thirds. Even if in the photograph, if the horizon is up higher, you need to move it down lower so it's in the bottom third, or up higher so it's in the top third. I'm also coming in and just drawing a really rough drawing of where the trees are. In preparing the paper for paint, you need to remember that you're going to only paint where the clouds are. So making that part of the paper wet is going to be a really good effect. Coming in and negative painting the clouds now, and this is with cerulean blue, notice how I'm holding my brush sideways. I'm only painting the sky. I'm not painting the clouds. And that allows the paint to do a wet into wet right where those clouds are. Now, you can just leave this alone the way it is, or what we're going to do is we're going to come in and paint some midtones and some darker tones so that the contrast in the sky is really high. I'm coming in with another brush load of paint just because I didn't think that the shadows were dark enough. And I'm adding that darker glazing technique just to make the clouds look a little bit more three-dimensional. Also remember that down at the bottom, closer to the horizon line, those clouds are going to be much smaller. It gives it a perspective, it makes it look like it's farther away. Now I'm coming in with a very dark gray, adding a little bit more of the Payne's gray into the mixture. And since that wet it down, I'm adding I add a little bit more Payne's gray, and that is probably the darkest I'm going to go. I'm looking at the photograph and noticing where the darkest place on the photograph is, and also on the clouds, to make sure that it gives it some distance and gives it some depth. I decided to spritz the clouds just because I felt that I wanted them to be more misty looking. And then I'm taking a paper towel here and lifting up places where I thought it needed to be lighter. So I'm building up that contrast as we're going. Taking the hairdryer and drying it all down. And then noticing that things have lightened up a little bit, I'm going to intensify that dark again. Once again, holding my paintbrush sideways enables you to get just a little bit more detail, a little bit of texture of the paper showing. Don't worry about the straight edges right now. We're going to come back in just a minute and we're going to soften those edges. And the way we're going to soften those edges is by taking a clean brush, rinsed out with water, and we're going to wipe it down so that it's just damp, doesn't have hardly any water in it. And then we're just going to rub right on those edges, and that's going to soften it down. And here we go. So softening those edges, you can see how I dip it in the water and then wipe it off with a paper towel and then rub it on those sections. Now you only want to rub just one little section at a time. You can't go over the whole thing just by doing that once, because you're lifting up color. That's what you're doing to soften that area. And this just makes that darkened area look a little bit more cloud-like. After it dried completely, I felt that the blue sky needed a little bit more value. So I took some more of the cerulean and mixed in a little bit of cobalt this time and added a little bit more blue to the sky. Now we're going to add our white gouache. Two different ways that you can use this gouache. You can use it straight from the tube, just sticking your brush in. You can see how I'm kind of mixing it up. And you want to have a smaller brush for this, a small round brush. And then just looking at the photograph and seeing where those highlights are, where that silver lining is on the clouds in the sky. Now the other way that you can do this is that you can take and just squeeze out a little bit of the gouache onto your palette and then just mix it up really good. I do that a little bit later when I needed a little bit more gouache on my brush, especially right in the center where I want to bump up the white where the sun is shining through. This is what really gives your clouds some dimension, because you have the lightest tones, you have the mid-tones, and you have the darker tones. Coming back in again with the darker tones. Never hurts to come back in and add some darks if they're not dark enough. And I spritzed them a little bit and took my paper towel again and wiped it down a little bit. I was just lifting up some, and I didn't want that darkened to go into the lighter spots. And especially on that cloud on the right, you can really see how it's building up the dimension with each thing that I'm doing. Now this is where I take the paint right from the palette and use the gouache right from the palette and really make those areas show. Now to create the sun rays coming out, you want to have just a little bit of gouache on your brush, and your brush needs to be dry. So you can dragging it across the paper and doing a dry brush technique. You may want to practice this on another piece of paper before you do it here, but you can see how doing a dry brush allows you to see the texture of the paper really easily. Now we're going into our glazing, and this is a mixture of quinacridone gold and a little bit of cerulean. Practice this on another piece of paper before you put it down on your paper, because you don't want it to be too green. Again, it's not about the landscape, it's about that sky. You need to dry it after each glaze. Now I made the glaze a little bit darker, and I'm coming in with my second layer of glaze. What I have to do sometimes is in the middle of this, creating that glaze, just dip the tip of your brush in the water, and that tends to make that paint go a little bit farther and a little bit easier to paint over that large area and to create that wash. Now I'm doing it a third glaze, and this time I'm looking specifically at details where there's little hills or little roads that create that darkness. Once you have the main part of your painting finished and it's dry, that's an important piece to make sure that foreground area is dry. Then you're able to come in with your paint, and this is my green mixture mixed with a little bit of the Payne's gray, and to paint in the foreground. And the foreground has these wonderful trees right there on the side. And again, this is a view that I had when I was staying in Hartselle, Colorado this summer, and so it was a good memory for me to remember what this looked like. But anyway, so just coming in, putting in your details, taking your time, being careful not to smear it with your hand as you're working. Now if you are painting trees like this, best way to do it is to come in with a line and then kind of bounce your paintbrush back and forth to create it. You can see I've got a line here, and this is a little bush, so it's not really one of the trees, but making sure that you're thinking also about perspective. Some of the trees are lighter than the others. Here's one that those two bushes are in the background. However, this one here is more in the foreground, and also use some overlapping. You're not going to see much space in between the trees because they will overlap, and again that will create some distance there. Also, don't forget the shadows. Because of the sun being very bright, there's going to be a definite shadow coming from each one of these trees. And so I added that. Once I had kind of a very light shadow down, then I came in with the darker green value and made the shadows. Coming in, adding some trees down there in the distance. Don't keep it all one color. Come in with some shadows on the trees themselves. Don't just paint them with one color because there will be some dark areas and some light areas together. I found a place up here in the sky that I wanted to have more white, so I touched it up just a little bit. I got some gouache in a spot I didn't want it, so I just took a wet brush and kind of blending it in to that hill. I'm going to put a little bit of paint on it now, cover that up a little bit. And here's the finished painting.